So I don't know if you've tried this already. Next to your mute button, there's a little up arrow and you can select which microphone to use. And then you have to the computer has to have permission to use the microphone, or like Zoom has to have permission to use it. Maybe you know this all already.
How about now?
Oh yeah.
There she is.
Thank you. You said
Yay.
I was like, I don't know, guys. Don't know how I messed this up. Hello. Thank you all for joining me. And I'm actually going to be sharing the screen. So don't worry if you don't want to be all on the Zoom live. So I'm gonna go ahead and switch. Welcome everyone. I'm gonna get started, technical difficulties. So we'll get started, and let me share screen. Okay. Share screen. Thank you. All right. So why are we here today with Abundant Life Tarot? We are here today because I wanted to do a follow-up lecture, or I like to call it a discussion, on different lessons that were covered during the Choosing Your Next Deck, Curating Your Collection course that I have on the website at Abundant Life Tarot. And so oftentimes there will be ideas and additional information I want to share that wasn't included in the original content that was in the course. So this is also an opportunity for folks who want to chime in and ask questions or just discuss things that, is on their mind or on their heart. And yeah, let's get to it. Let's get to it. This particular lesson is about spiritual considerations in collecting decks. And this isn't spiritual considerations about tarot reading or whether you should do it or not. This is strictly and exclusively discussing some things that come up for us as collectors on our collecting journey. All right. So we can also call it ethical considerations too. So for those who say, I'm not really spiritual, this isn't really good, there's nothing for me here, but another word for it could be ethical versus spiritual. So we can call it ethical considerations, which I think may be more apt. As we go along, you'll see what I mean. So I have to move us here. I don't know how to just make it my screen. Oh, hold on, guys. There we go. All right, so I'm just going to read this. I believe we are all spiritual beings living out our physical expression of ourselves. We are human and we live in a world with other humans, animals, and Mother Nature. Acting ethically towards ourselves and others is what keeps us grounded in love, truth, and humility. And so this little quote that I put here came up to me when I was creating this little PowerPoint presentation, because I feel like we each have to have, maybe what do you want to call it? A mission statement as it relates to your collection, something that you live by, something short, quick, 1 or 2 sentences, nothing major, but that it just kind of keeps you grounded in knowing the true north when you are collecting, because it's easy to get pulled this away, that away, and you'll see what I'm talking about in a moment. So, you know me and tarot, and I like to have you all pull out your decks and let's see what the cards have to say. So what can we, or what can I, what's most pressing, can I learn during this lecture on spiritual considerations in collecting decks? So what I did was some 3 weeks back, I did a spread, okay? And this was what I wanted to ask the cards on, well, what is something that we can learn from this particular discussion? What may come up for us? And I shuffled the cards and I used jumping cards. So the cards that jumped were the ones that are at the top, and which is tarot, it's the field tarot. And then at the bottom, it's the career and money oracle. And those are oracle cards. So for those who may have a difficult time seeing the cards that jumped to my question, what can we learn during this lecture on spiritual considerations and collecting? The cards that jumped was Two of Wands over rescuer, strength over loss, the Fool traditionally, but in this deck it's called beginnings, over science. And you could just maybe even have one or two cards. I tend to like bigger spreads, but you could just, one or two cards that jump, or one or two cards that you pick or turn over. And I like the question even more so, what is going to be my takeaway, or what can be my takeaway from this discussion about spiritual considerations, AKA ethical considerations? So I had made some notes because I knew I wasn't going to remember necessarily what the cards meant to me when I saw them, when they jumped, but I'm looking at them now and I'm having additional thoughts surrounding these cards here. Like the Two of Wands is us seeking, right? As collectors, we're seeking the next great deck. We're seeking the one that we really vibe and connect with. We're seeking that beautiful one, that sought after one. It's always, with the Two of Wands, like what, choices and which direction can we go? And it's over rescuer. I think there's a sense in collecting sometimes that, like with rescuer, like not savior, but this deck is going to, when I purchase this deck or when I trade for this deck, this is going to make me feel good. This is going to give me better readings. Oh, this is going to look great on my shelf. This rescuer tendency. So I wanted to share with you my notes here. The first set, and I read it over Two of Wands, over rescuer. So the Two of Wands is about planning, and planning is important when you're doing a collection because it will help avoid some of the pitfalls and challenges that we're going to later discuss when we are spiritual beings collecting very physical but beautiful things. So plot a course of action or plan for your long-term vision of your deck collecting habits. Why are you being called to collect? What about having lots of decks draws you in? Is there guilt associated with collecting decks? Why or why not? And what do you think of others who judge collecting habits? And do you judge other people's collecting habits? And is it wrong to have a vision of a vast collection? Or is it better to know and prepare for the growth of the collection before one gets started? What are your deck collection goals and why? A lot of times we got into collecting without any consideration for what that collection would evolve and morph into. I'm guilty of that, right? That's not bad. That's not a bad thing that happened. I mean, it happened, but did I have to deal with some challenges from having such a large collection? Yeah. If I could do it over again, would I have been more intentional? Would I have been more considerate of the choices I made and giving more thought into really, truly what size collection I wanted? Because mine grew to about 300 decks in the span of like 2016 to 2020. And, some people that's like, oh, I have 1,000 decks, big deal. But some of us are like, oh boy, and especially, things happen, things come up. And I see in people's like posts where they say, oh, I don't know, I have all these decks. How do you guys connect with all these decks? And the truth of the matter is, at least for me personally, it ain't happening. I end up working with one or two decks as working decks that I constantly go to, and the rest have sat on the shelf. So just some thoughts there. And the rescuer has a very tiny font. So I just wanted to read it off to you all because I can't see that. Someone may enter your life and resolve any difficulties you're experiencing. So that's why I went the direction I did with these two cards. It's because it's like, oh, that feeling, a deck. This new deck creator has this new deck out. I gotta have it. And asking for help is not a sign of weakness. Quite the opposite. It shows your strength. That's one I think that is also apt. You know, talk to your friends, talk to your collector friends, ask for their honest insights and opinions. We do that all the time in social media, but it's also okay to consult your current decks about asking about if whether or not a new deck should come into the crew, should come into the collection. It's okay to ask for spiritual guidance surrounding your collecting. You know, why not? I do now. Now, before I even consider buying a new deck, I throw down some cards and with my tried and true and see. Now, do I always listen? No, but that's how we are, right? Sometimes we listen to the little angel over here, but then the little devil over here is like, oftentimes I go this way, but sometimes I go this way. All right. Uh-oh. Let me go back. The second set is the strength card, right? And it's over loss. So challenges will come on your deck collecting journey. And there may be money woes. You still want to lust for decks. You still want the new deck experience, but you're experiencing financial hardships, some of you. Sometimes storms blow through and destroy some decks, right? So there's the loss because you see it sitting over the loss card, the lost oracle card. There may be broken promises from deck creators, envy from yourself or from others on your collection. And how do we remain strong when loved ones question our collecting habits, question, why do you have so many decks? You know, in Western society, we were taught to spend our money wisely. Are we doing that when collecting dozens or hundreds of decks? Could our money be better saved or spent on something else? How do you find the courage to carry on in your collecting habits or to shift direction or shift gears? You know, so yeah, and loss is just loss. The tiny print here is expect some financial turmoil in the near future. A job loss can make it difficult to keep control of your money, and you will have to work really hard to make ends meet. So, you know, I was during those years of collecting and just doing a lot of retail therapy and my own personal experience. I had a job that afforded me to be able to buy lots of decks. Now I'm completely self-employed. My financial situation has changed, right? So it's like, okay, if I continued on the path that I was on, I could push myself into financial ruin depending on my expensive deck habits. So, and that would definitely affect my spiritual mind and heart and spirit, right? Like it would just be like, oh my gosh, what did I do? And you can start to internalize it and start to tear yourself down. But it's important to be strong and recognize that your life has seasons. There's things that ebb and flow, come and go. is your collecting habits in alignment with what season of life you find yourself in? So let's see. The Fool card, the beginnings, as the field tarot calls it, over science. And so I love the Fool card. I love that. It's like, oh, we're embarking on a new journey with a new deck, and so that's something that instantly comes to my mind with this. But the beginning. So some of these things I just kind of pose questions versus just writing out card meanings. How do we keep the wonder, the newness alive in deck collecting? Or is that even possible? And just like I mentioned before, our deck collecting habits and our lives ebb and flow, and even how we feel towards collecting at times. You know, sometimes we're all in it, and then other times we haven't thought about searching for a deck in months, and maybe our attention has been placed somewhere else, and that's not a bad thing. Let's see. So the Field's Tarot beginning means saying in part, trust what the universe has in store, embrace the unknown, and get ready to set foot on a divine path. We will not have all the answers on the outset of our collecting journey. And that's not what this course is about. But it's about awareness. It's about thinking about that. You can start thinking about it whether you have 2 decks in your collection or whether you have 1,500 decks. You know, we may be clumsy in our efforts in our quest to have fun while we're collecting, right? And collecting some of the best and baddest decks. We may accidentally or intentionally buy counterfeit decks. We may not pay a lot of close attention to whether there's inclusivity and diversity in decks. You know, we may not budget accordingly and maybe overspend on decks. And we may not appreciate or even use our decks beyond just opening them the first day that we got it. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't collect. Quite the contrary. It's just being more mindful about it. And we should grow from our experiences, pick ourselves up after each stumble, and help others when they stumble too, and look at it as I'm helping someone. And not all help is welcome, so we have to kind of intuitively know when that is going to be something that's welcomed, because if it's not, it's not. But for ourselves, it should always be welcome. We should always be like, okay. Oh, and I wanted to go to science. So I'm just going to read the little meanings here because, like I said, the font is terribly small. There is something unfolding for you with an open mind if you work with an open mind. And apply a scientific approach to your business or financial problem. You guys saw my Excel spreadsheets if you've been on my YouTube channel. And I take a more scientific approach to things of like, okay, I need lists, I need things where I can see and track, or a more scientific approach would be, okay, I want to, each time I consider a new deck, I want to meditate on it, or I want to throw some cards. It doesn't have to be Excel spreadsheets, but it's just being, again, okay, 1 + 1 is 2. Am I being consistent through my collecting journey? Or am I just like, oh, like just all over the place? It starts to wear on you spiritually after a while too, because you start to think, oh, is it me? Is there something wrong with me that I just kind of go over here and buy all these decks and this or that? No, it's because there maybe just need a little bit more of method to your madness in your collecting, or maybe over collecting is a symptom of something else that may be being ignored in the rest of your life. So enough with the spread. And we'll ask at the end of this presentation what came up for you in terms of the question, what are your takeaways from this course, or what will be, what will it be, or what was it? And we'll see. We'll keep going for time's sake. Okay, so now we're going to get into the meat of this course. I wanted to take you all on a little journey with the cards and get you just thinking about, like, okay, we're collecting, here we go. Is it spiritual? Is it ethical? Who knows? Key players. In the collector's journey, they will encounter many key players. And these key players pay attention to, because we will be consulting and probably referring back to quite a few of them throughout the remainder of this course. So who are we talking about? Deck collectors, you, me, folks who actually purchase, trade, make decks for, to impart and share and purchase commerce of decks, right? Deck collectors. And another category, but similar, other deck collectors. The people, not you or me, but the people outside, other deck collectors. The deck's creator. The artist. The publisher and or printer. Family, supportive and unsupportive. And I'll pause here for a moment because, again, this isn't about whether or not your family is okay with you reading cards. This is no. I'm talking about supportive and unsupportive, where you can have family like, wow, my mom or cousin or this person has 1,000 decks in their apartment, and I think that's cool. Or the unsupportive one who's like, I can't, you may feel compelled to hide your deck purchases from this person, or this person isn't really supportive of a large, hoard of decks. They don't get it. So they can become a key player in the madness of collecting decks. Clients. I work with clients, probably many of you do too, or not, or maybe you read for other people and maybe not necessarily for money. But, they're a small portion, but for me, not so much, because I always use a justification of like, oh, this is going to be a deck, my working deck. This is what I'm going to use for clients. And sometimes it can start to become a crutch for me, like an excuse to just buy a new deck. And so I know that in the back of my mind, I have to be extra careful when I start using that excuse. Oh, this will be great for my clients. The next one is Facebook groups and people in Facebook groups. And it's like the Facebook groups are its own little, to me, like its own little entities, its own little representation. So let's keep going. YouTube channel hosts. So they definitely drive the commerce of selling and trading decks, right? We are looking at YouTube quite a bit. Maybe we go to Instagram sometimes. I don't usually. I usually go to YouTube to see how people are working with their decks, what new decks are out. So yeah, I put the sellers and distributors. So this could be, I'm trying to think of a website. I suppose you could even say Amazon. That would be a big one, right? But I'm thinking of folks on Etsy, or is it Little Red Writing? I can't think of the names, but the sellers and distributors of the decks. Shop owners, and when I say shop owners, I mean like brick and mortar. I know we're in pandemic time, we're coming out of it, but shop owners. And the secondary market. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But secondary market is, so after you purchase your deck, you have it in your collection a while, and you're like, I want to sell this. I'm going to sell it to folks in the secondary market, on eBay, in tarot, swap and sell, Facebook groups, things like that. And tarot conventions and trade shows. Now, again, pandemic, a lot of that face-to-face stuff came to an end, but it's a great place to purchase decks, a great place to talk to the creators and understand what was behind the deck. I can't wait till those come back. But these are the key players. Some in your collecting life will be more prominent than others. Some may not even apply to you here. For me, I run into pretty much many of these key players a lot, but not as much since I've kind of cooled it on purchasing a lot of decks this year so far. So in looking at this list, how can these key players affect our spiritual consideration outcomes? And how can we actually affect them, the key players? And if you look at the key players, for example, the deck's creator, you know, it's a two-way street, right? So let's keep going. Uh-oh, I have to move us again. And hold on a second. Okay, good. Just making sure it's recording. So why is it important to know who the key players are in the deck collecting world? And are there any other key players that should be added to the list? I feel that it's important that we know who the key players are because time and time again, we're going to interact with them. And well, I'll show you even more. Let's go to the next slide before I get ahead of myself. So I broke it down into 3 boxes, if you will. And we're going to go back and look at the key players in a moment as we touch upon what's in each box. We have overspending and underusing as one box. The middle box is counterfeit decks. And the last one is cultural appropriation. So let's go first to overspending and underusing. Shopping addictions and tarot collecting. And I've mentioned it before. I'm guilty of doing some retail therapy and looking for the newest and latest decks. Now, again, I'm not judging. Hey, I did it. But I would be lying to myself and not honoring truth if I didn't say, you know, some of my purchases were, you know, in the middle of the night, couldn't sleep. I'm like, what can I do? Oh, I can go check out this creator's page and see if this is something I should get. And then I get it, I unbox it on YouTube, and guess what? I use it maybe 1 or 2 more times. Oftentimes not, it just sits on the shelf. Then I start this cycle of feeling bad about it. Then it's an expensive deck, right? Don't want to just sell it for nothing, or, you know, you're not going to always sell it for more. Some decks yield, you know, a profit, right? But many of them, no, when you're selling to the secondary market, you will sell at a loss. So then you're like, well, don't want to get rid of those decks, so they'll just sit up there. And it's a cycle. Which brings me to number 2. And then, so with shopping addictions and collecting, I'm going to go back here for a moment. Let's look at the key players. So right there would be me and my overspending, maybe not spending money on saving, or, you know, something for the kids or something. So that could affect a key player in my life, which is my family. I'm certainly positively affecting the creator's bottom line by purchasing the decks, which is wonderful. But me, the deck collector, is steadily climbing, like the number of decks is climbing as I just not really think about what it is I want my collection to look like 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now. Overspending on numerous or expensive decks. So I talk about this a lot. I'm very transparent with you guys. At first I was like, oh yeah, I'm okay with the number of decks. But when I made a big move in my life and had to face the number of decks I had and realized there was only so many could come with me, And then also realizing these are really the only ones I really want in my collection and want to have and work with. It was like, oh, and I try not to think about all the money I've spent, but I have spreadsheets, so I keep track of that. And I remind myself in the grand scheme of things, why I've frivolously spent money elsewhere. But again, it's like some of these decks just sat. And some of us have expensive tastes, right? Like we want the big, heavy cardstock. We want those beautiful satiny finish cards, and it would help if it's slightly bigger and then a big box, and it just goes on and on. I get all excited still, but indie and out of print deck prospecting. And so what I mean by bullet point number 3 is some people think that it's not a good idea, or it's not spiritually nice to take a deck, buy a bunch of decks right when the decks come out. Like, so let's say it was a Kickstarter deck. Kickstarter deck goes out, then you can maybe purchase some decks right after that. So let's say this person bought 3 decks, and they know that they're prospecting, and they know that it can fetch some extra dough, right? I'll sell it for a profit, and I'll sell it as opposed to I only paid $60 per deck when I purchased it. I see now that there's a huge demand, so I'm going to ask for $750. I'm going to ask for $1,000 on this, and I get it. I'm going to get it. And some people frown upon that. Some people say that's not right. You shouldn't do that. Where's your ethics? And other people are like, it's a capitalist town, society we live in. I don't know what the big deal is. And so I just put that in there is for people to start to think about, how do you feel about that? There may come a time when it's time for you to sell your decks. And so if you have a financial need, does that justify hiking up the price? Does it not? Does it matter? I know my own personal feelings on it, and I don't know if it's even really necessary for me to share. I'm a collector. So I feel like at any point when I'm ready to sell it, I'm going to see what the market bears, see what other decks have sold for, and then sell accordingly. That's how that would be what would help me sleep at night. But not everybody does it that way. Is that wrong? Is that right? Depends, right? So let me move my little peeps over here. We talked about this before. Underusing decks and having them sit and just energetically take up space. Now, some people are like, they can take up space. I don't care. I have the space. It's not a big deal. I used to be that person. But now space matters. I always actually kind of did, but that's neither here nor there. Now space matters. Now I just want to make sure I use the decks and keep them going. And it feels so good to give decks. And last year when I was doing my death year and I sold a bunch of decks, I gave a bunch of decks away. It felt so good knowing that they were going to people who more than likely will use them more than I did. So I felt good about that. And I'm still going to be doing that this year as I start to sell more decks and things and give them away. Also, as a side note, moving from a very dry climate to a very humid climate, for me, I find that I need to move my decks around a lot to make sure that there's no wetness or things going on. It's just totally different lifestyle change I have going on with my collection. So there you go. Okay, let's go on to the next one. There's a lot of them, as you can see. Overspending, overusing box had quite a bit. The morality of collecting lots of decks. Does it make us less or more spiritual? Is there something inherently wrong with it? And we kind of touched upon that with like the prospecting, the deck prospecting. Is there anything wrong with it? For me personally, yes and no. There's nothing wrong with having a large collection, but for me personally, and I've had a chance to think about this, I now have a problem with decks just sitting unused and having a bunch of them, and they just I can't even appreciate their art. I never get to see them. So so number 5 is both for me. But some people, it may not be. It's just nice to stop and think about it, right? Journal about it. Number 6, what about the environment? And so when we go back to the key players, let's go back. I didn't put Mother Earth on here, but I should have, because I now live on an island. And even now, when even coming from California, where we have, quite a, what is it? Waste, like, it's a proper waste management system. Although it's not really proper these days. Trash is everywhere from what I can see in pictures, but that's neither here nor there. But here it's a whole thing. And so I feel a little guilty having, decks coming in and all these packages and boxes and stuff like that. It's just, so now more than ever, I'm more confronted with the environment and my impact on it. And even some people will say, well, it's just a little deck. I mean, it just has a little box, and not all the time, and not when they're coming all the time. Plastics. And what happens when you do decide to dispose of the decks when it's time? You're like, I don't want this deck, and you sell it and somebody tosses it. It's just something to consider, not judgment. And I was not the most considerate myself. And so with that overuse, or let me go back to here, overspending and underusing, think about the key players of who that affects. Usually I feel like it affects us more than anybody else, but I don't know. It's just something to think about. Now I'm going to move us down here. Counterfeit debts. So we all have probably our opinions on this. So again, it's not so much my opinion that matters as such. I like to get people thinking about how do they feel about it. And this is going to be an interesting one to circle back to the key players. Number 1, those who unwittingly buy counterfeit decks. Why do you think this happens? Is there anything that can be done to prevent or mitigate the chances of it happening? And then number 2. I'm getting ahead of myself. Number 2, those who intentionally buy counterfeit decks. Why? What are some reasons some would seek out counterfeit decks? How can this be problematic for some of the key players we mentioned earlier? So again, this isn't about judging people on whether or not, like some people will be really apologetic in Facebook groups saying, oh my gosh, I didn't know. What should I do with it? I'm really sad. And they try to make it right. And then there's some people who seek out counterfeit decks. And this is not a judgment time where I'm going to be like, well, this is wrong, this is right. I can only speak for what works for me. I like to have a deck collection that is with integrity. It means a lot to me. As a person who likes to write and create words and things like that, it would be devastating for me to see someone plagiarizing it. You know what I mean? So I try to treat others how I want to be treated, is how I operate. I also, at some point, may sell decks. It would break my heart to sell a deck that I'm very I would think that it would be impossible for me to have a counterfeit deck. But you know what I'm saying? Like, it would be really upsetting to sell one unwittingly or wittingly to someone. I believe, in karma. And I just want to operate very up and up because I want to treat others the way I wish to be treated. And I want a collection that actually holds value. Now, some people, they don't really care. They're like, look, I just want the Doreen Virtue's Romance Angels, the little, I don't care if it's their wish, and I don't care if it's crap, and I don't really care what other people think. This is what I want to use. Hey, okay. Just know, looking back at our key players, people are affected. debt collectors who made what they thought was an honest purchase, and then they get a counterfeit debt. The debt's creator, how does that impact them? How does us wittingly or unwittingly purchasing a counterfeit debt, how does that affect the creator and the artist? The publisher and the printer. I mean, some people have our we have our feelings about publishers and printing houses and things like that. But again, what are the ramifications of having a flood of counterfeits and something that's supposed to be considered precious high art in our eyes, at least, The family, not so much a key player for this one, but again, it's like clients, again, Facebook groups. I've seen quite a, not so much now, but some heated arguments in the past about this topic. Some people not really caring what the other has to say about the subject. YouTube channel hosts, and sellers and distributors, shop owners. So yes, key players can be affected, and you can be affected. Is it good? Is it bad? That's for you to decide. So now we move on to the third box, cultural appropriation. Number one, how do we reconcile this issue when we stumble on a beautiful yet culturally insensitive deck? I've been guilty, I'm sure. Number two, what can each of the key players do to combat this issue of cultural appropriation? Can any of the key players, and you can think back to the ones we talked about, can any of them really influence and affect change as it relates to cultural appropriation? Number three, can cultural appropriation truly be avoided? And number four, should others be allowed to use a deck that does not culturally belong to them? Why or why not? So these are just some ethical or spiritual considerations. Let's go to the next slide because it deals with cultural appropriation. So let me move us over here. What is cultural appropriation? And I found a simple little explanation on this website called verywellmind.com. So it says, cultural appropriation refers to the use of objects or elements of a non-dominant culture in a way that doesn't respect their original meaning, give credit to their source, or reinforces stereotypes or contributes to oppression. Okay? In this way, cultural appropriation is a layered and nuanced phenomenon that many people may have trouble understanding or may not realize when they are doing it themselves. I'll be the first to admit, I probably was guilty. I can even think of one deck that I may have been guilty of it on. It was the Vision Quest Tarot. I feel like I could have better approached knowing a bit more about the cultures depicted. And when I found out, there are some people who have strong feelings about that deck, even though I was like, oh, I'm in love with it. I think it's wonderful. But I'm not Native American. So I started to have these weird feelings about it, probably because I was like, feeling like I may have culturally appropriated it. But you see what I'm saying? We all can have our moments. So it may be natural. So this is, let me move this down here. What is cultural appropriation? Continue. It may be natural to merge and blend cultures as people from different backgrounds come together and interact. In fact, many wonderful inventions and creations have been born from the merging of such cultures, such as country music. I mean, there's many examples, I suppose, right? However, the line is drawn when a dominant cultural group, see, my internet is unstable. Don't be unstable. However, the line is drawn when a dominant cultural group makes use of elements of a non-dominant group in a way that the non-dominant group views as exploitative. In this way, and I put a little red arrow there, in this way, cultural appropriation can be most easily recognized by asking the question of the non-dominant group, does the use of this element of your culture in this way bothers you? And so, let me go back here. So with cultural appropriation, let's just list these here and let's move us down here. Who's affected, right? Who has the power to possibly affect changes? I think we all do. I think we all have a powerful role to play in having folks feel more included and having folks not like, oh my God, like feel awful when they see a deck, or you know what I mean? It's not just the deck creator's responsibility. I've seen decks that have been in full-on creation and somebody chimes in and says, hey, did you know this is actually quite bothersome to this culture? I don't know if you want to research it or do more. And then the creator responds in kind, either yes or no, but usually they're like, oh my goodness, I want to correct this. So if you see that, don't be afraid to speak up on it, is how I feel. The deck artists do research, research before you start the creation. And the publisher and the printer, same thing. So as you can see, key players have ways to influence outcomes. I've seen it with deck creations. Now, of course, with the mass market decks, not so much, but again, it's incumbent on the creator and the artist and the publisher and the printer to look, could this potentially be offensive to a group of people that we are having featured in this deck, or we're writing guidebooks on, and we don't know very much about this cultural practice or something. So, you know, just something to be mindful of. So let's move on. All right. So, talked about this a lot. Where do we discuss these spiritual considerations around collecting decks? And these conversations do happen often in social media, which is a great way to share ideas and feelings on a given issue, right? Like I see it happening every single day, and that is an appropriate place for it to happen. But are there instances when this may not be a good idea? Are there ways we should approach these conversations? And so again, I just want people to be mindful before they start to contribute to a conversation, and then also listen and also be prepared to receive information. But it's a great place. I think it's awesome that we're having conversations about surrounding those big three boxes, right? You know, so it should happen there. However, let's be responsible in how we, deliver information and how we start to receive it. And it gets heated, but I think that's because we feel very passionate about things. But we're all on the same team here, right? Deck collectors, we're as far as the key players. So at the end of the day, just approach these conversations with the idea of, okay, I'm open, I'm willing to learn, and I'm also willing to help when I see someone reach out and ask for it, especially on social media. So for introspection and insights, I mentioned to you all earlier that I will throw cards or shuffle cards and do a spread to ask about whether or not I want to add a deck to my collection, and more importantly, thinking about what kind of collection I want to have going forward. So I created 2 tarot spreads, the deck collecting philosophy spread, and the facing my deck collecting habits shadow spreads. And so these spreads are on abundantlifetarot.com in the choosing your next deck, curating your collection course, like documents. It's available for you to download. You can use it as you wish. You can use only 1 or 2 questions. but some of the questions will really help you get very clear about that mission statement that maybe you one day want to create, and clear about the kind of collection you want to have, and maybe have this be part of your scientific approach and how you, from this day forward, add a deck to your collection. Or maybe you are already doing that, and I think that's awesome as well. So we have to get the word out to help others, because I still see a lot of people struggling out there with their collection. And if I could help people a little, just smooth their journey, like smooth their path a little bit, I like to do that. So yeah, check out the spreads. Check them out, try them out. Let me know on YouTube or in the Facebook group, in the comments section, what came up for you. All right. Okay, so why is any of this important? Well, I feel like it's important, but I put here, there's no judge or jury, but your subconscious may speak to you about your collecting habits. And nothing's worse than being like tormented or feeling a certain kind of way towards yourself, towards what you're doing or not doing. And that's why I think this is important. And I think we could, I think we can always try to aspire for ease and for a better way of approaching things. That's all, just giving you some food for thought on how we can be better citizens in this world. So why is any of this important? I actually have bulleted points. We desire to be good consumers and creators. We can have a deck collection that has integrity, okay? We can be good stewards of this earth. We can be a part of a supportive, inclusive, and culturally sensitive community. I get all emotional. I think many of us really want that for ourselves, for our collection, and for others who may not be able to say that for themselves, So last bullet point, I think it's the last one. Our mental, emotional, and spiritual selves will thank us later when our deck collecting habits are in alignment with our soul's highest intentions. And before we conclude and wrap up for any comments or questions, I have to look and see what time it is. I think we're getting close to being done. Set yourself up for a success. So, let me give you some pointers here. Pause before you make a purchase. Do a spread, sleep on it. This advice I give throughout this course because it's helped me a lot, especially this year. And then I end up not buying it. So I guess I didn't want it as bad as I thought, at least for now. Track your purchases and make lists. Some people still probably reject that idea, but honestly, it's eye-opening and it's helpful to be able to track your purchases on a list. Even if you don't do like me and do an Excel spreadsheet, you can just do a straight up Word doc or just a notebook devoted to your collection. It's helpful and it's revealing. Do your research. Key players, wherever you fall in the key player world of the deck collecting world, do your research. We all can benefit from that. You as a deck collector, research the creators, research the artists, research the publishers. Is there anything in there that would make you cringe if you didn't do your research? Like, so later on you purchase the deck and you're like, oh man, if I would have known that this person actually said this craziness on their social media, I probably would not have purchased this deck. And now, so do your research. Creators, research, especially when you're dealing with a culture not your own. Ask people from the culture. They want to help. People want to help in those instances. So I mentioned that. Look up creator social media sites. I do all the time. So it's just a tip. You don't have to. Some people don't care. I care because I have a YouTube channel. I have social media where if I recommend a deck, I want to make sure that I'm not just sending off something that's crazy to someone like as a recommendation. I want to feel solid. Like, again, I try to act in an ethical way. If something doesn't feel right about a potential new deck, ask the decks you already own. We talked about that, right? That's exactly why being a tarot reader is so cool. We can ask these types of questions to our cards. And I do all the time. They're my girlfriends and my guy friends too. Utilize the tarot spreads mentioned in this course. So there you go. And I think this is the last bullet point here. Be honest, but also patient with yourself. Spiritual growth is a process and not a fly-by-night endeavor. You know, we may stumble and we may fall, but it's, don't beat yourself up, especially new collectors, and in season ones. I stumble and fall from time to time, but it's a journey. You're gonna fall, but get up, keep going, keep going. I had to do my little reference of that. So I'm just gonna play here. I thank you for joining me. Before we wrap up, did anyone have any comments, anything that you want to share, any questions? And before I open it up to the floor for any questions or comments, I want to thank you for taking time out of your day to join me to discuss these themes, these things surrounding collecting decks. I appreciate each and every one of you. I really do. And I will definitely just be specifically looking out for any comments in YouTube, because I'll be having this uploaded later on replay on YouTube inside the course and sharing it in my Facebook group so people can watch it there. But I'll be eyes peeled for comments. So thank you, thank you, thank you. All right. Any questions for me? Any comments? Any thoughts? Let's see.
Want to take a look at the chat where we've been having a whole other conversation?
Nice. Let's go to the chat. Thank you. I completely forgot about the chat. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I would have. You just mentioning this is wonderful because I didn't know, and now I have to go through and look at them. Okay, let's see what we got here. All right. And so I'm just looking here. Over-collecting is a sign that something else is being neglected in your life. Yeah, at least for me, I realize I have been neglecting strongly self-care to the point that I was just not in a good way last year, if some of you have seen in my little Death Year Updates video series. So see what could be possibly neglected. And even the cards, even you could just ask the cards, your current, your decks, what may I be neglecting as I hyper focus on collecting decks? What could I be neglecting? Yeah, for me, a big spiritual consideration, I'm just reading the comments from the chat. For me, a big spiritual consideration is what I'm working on in my life and how a deck can support learning and growth. That is a very important consideration. And it's one that will help you in staying in alignment, right? And I always valued those kind of decks, but I ebb and flow with them, right? Sometimes I'm feeling that vibe, and sometimes I'm like, oh no, I just want to focus on collecting decks that I'm using for clients, or So it's the bottom line is it's important to know what season you're in with it, and then recognizing, how is your collection supporting that, or not, or are you just still buying? Not saying you, the person who left this comment, but I'm saying that sometimes we can use we're not in even alignment with what we set forth that we said we were doing, and then we're just still buying a bunch of decks. It's just important. Awareness is just important. That's all. Awareness, and it's beautiful. That's a wonderful reason to add a deck to the collection. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, so we have another comment here. I've definitely done it, and I'm still educating myself and figuring out what feels right for me, using decks with symbolism from cultures that aren't mine. And I think we all struggle with that. You know, even like I'm from even like I'm Black, right? And there are decks that I even feel like, oh, like the Orisha decks. I'm like, oh, you know, I'm just now starting to study and understand that. Do I get that deck? I even feel that way, and I'm a person of color. You know what I mean? So I think it's important to at least see how we feel about those things and then work through it. And I love the conversations I'm seeing in the Facebook groups and on YouTube where people are talking it out, processing it, and figuring it out for themselves and what direction they go. I used to be someone who was like, if I like the deck, I like it, I'm going to get it. I'm just going to buy it, and I'm not going to worry so much about that because I know my intentions. But then I started to do a little bit more introspection. I was like, I don't know if I sit well with that either, you know? So, yeah. Let's see, lots of decks that focus on shamanism seem to appropriate the source cultures. If we use decks to expose ourselves to other cultures or traditions, what are we adopting into our own practices? It's a very good point, Lisa. It's a very, very good point. I feel a certain kind of way, to be honest with you, with shamanism decks. I do. I bought a couple of them, right? And I was like, and then I started to do research after I bought these decks. So now I do research before I buy them. But after, and then after I saw what I saw on social media about a particular deck or a creator or their process of how they just slap some things together, I'm like, I don't feel comfortable trying to absorb that deck into my practice, my spiritual practice, because it feels icky. So I don't know. That's to me why I now research before, but I didn't always. And so then there was a question to this comment. Are you talking about the difference in educating yourself versus actually changing your practice to use the tools that you learned about? I found that even if I wanted to just learn from a deck, there's still the giant pitfall of being misled about the authenticity of how the culture is represented. When it's not your culture, you have to work harder to figure out if what is being portrayed is even accurate or appropriate to be shared outside the culture. It's a journey. It is a journey. I'm just reading the comments here. Yeah, the false interpretation. That's a good point there, actually. The false interpretation. I don't want to be guilty of that, especially as reading for clients. So many of my clients, they aren't going to care. They're like, oh, I'm just happy you're reading the cards. But I don't know. I might be reading for another collector or another tarot reader who might have a problem with it. So I'm just always mindful of my audience, of who I'm reading for, and me as an audience member too, you know. So I don't know. That's a good one, you guys. This is good. Let's see. All right. Okay, I like this. Thank you, Susan. One of the most powerful antidotes to cultural appropriation is having an authentic relationship with that culture. Maybe challenge yourself to do some research whenever you buy or use a potentially appropriative deck. Hearing how many people from that culture talk about their symbols. Absolutely. I'm glad I'm not the only one who feels like, okay, I think that's a good direction to go in. Okay. And thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. One thing I found helpful is to ask why I'm drawn to a certain representation of another culture, right? It's really important. And oftentimes there is a beautiful reason why we're drawn to it. And so we can start to study a little bit more why that is and what is it about it? Can I learn all aspects about it and really start to go in that direction? Can I find other ways to meet those needs that don't involve another culture at all? Can I create a more direct experience between myself and the earth, my community, and my deities? Thank you for that. That's beautiful. Important questions to ask ourselves. Sometimes we can, most times we can create our own direct relationship, versus going through another culture, but sometimes we can't. But if we're respectful, and being mindful of, the cultural appropriation definition, then maybe we can do it, right? Okay. Just reading here. While I'm going through, anybody have any comments or questions? Just want to make sure I look at these incredible comments. Thank you all. Yeah.
I don't have a question. I just want to say that I really enjoyed this presentation.
Thank you for saying that. I was like, I don't know if anyone's gonna really want to talk about this stuff, but I just thought we could have a little discussion around it. And I'm so grateful you came today. Thank you. Thank you. It's fun for me. I love talking to other tarot folks, so it's fun for me.
Well, it's a lot of fun for us too. And
Okay.
for myself, like I actually never thought about doing a spread on buying a deck. So it's a revelation.
Oh, good. Thank you for saying that too. Like, I know, and you could just ask a couple of questions. It don't even have to be a full-on spray. You could just be like, okay, how am I going to feel about this deck a year from now? That one usually gets me because I'm like, oh, I'm going to keep it on the shelf, I see, or oh, it's not going to be used, or oh, I'm not going to feel so great. It's just another a cool way to work with your decks, and then also do a little more deeper introspection about that next deck purchase. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that spread too. There's a deck that I'm interested in that has a separate book that comes with it. And I'm kind of like, they're both really expensive. So like, what do I think I would learn from? And I did your reading, thank you. And it basically said like the deck would sit there and it would be a challenge that I had spent the money, and the book would be something that I could learn from.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I do that a lot when there's a deck that I find really interesting and I don't think I will use it in readings. Like I just bought the guidebook for the Spirit Tarot. If you know that one, it's this really very inclusive deck. And I don't quite like the art, but I still want to learn from it. And so the book is great for like having the reference the cards without feeling like this is a deck I'm not using.
Yes. I actually like that idea too. I guess there can be an argument for a creator to make a guidebook, especially if it's a good guidebook, available for purchase only. I don't necessarily need any more decks, but I like to read. I like pretty books. I'm a sucker for books too. That's decks and books and crystals. Eek. But yeah, I love that. I love that you use the spread too, because it's like I've had some spreads and I had to be honest with myself. Like, this is saying it's too dense of a system right now for me to get into. And I have a lot going on. And then I'll feel guilty about keeping it on the shelf and not using it and all of this stuff, all this other stuff. And so it's interesting what comes up in the spread. And I'm like, I have to be honest with myself. Don't ignore what you just saw. That's why I sometimes hold myself accountable by recording them and uploading them and putting them periodically for you all to see. Because then I'm like, well, I did see this. I shouldn't buy the deck. Because they'll see what I did even in an unboxing video later. And sometimes the devil's like, no, get the deck, get the deck. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. And yeah, it's a learning process. But I even like I like just the idea of getting the book if that's possible. going there first. And yeah, sometimes the artwork can be like, ooh, I thought I could look past the artwork, but nope, can't look past it. And sometimes that spread will catch that too, like, you're not gonna like it.
Kim, I have to go, so I wanted to say thank you. I do the same thing with the books. I think it's, especially as I got a large collection, I'm like, do I need to shuffle another deck, or do I just really want to know what's behind the imagery to understand how people are interpreting tarot? Like, what's their take on these archetypes? And sometimes that's all I needed.
Yeah.
So the other thing, I just wanted to say your idea of a mission statement for collecting, like that's like, it took me back to when I was first learning tarot, and I took courses from Biddy Tarot, and she had you write your mission statement as a tarot reader, like your ethical
Yes.
statement as a tarot reader. And I was like, oh, that's the missing piece, the ethical statement for your collection itself. So you just leveled up the whole like learning to do tarot. I just want to tell you, groundbreaking. Woo.
You're too kind. Thank you for saying
I
that.
think you're brilliant. Okay, so bye everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. Thank you. So yeah. Any other comments, my peeps? I'm just going through, seeing if I see any other comments I want to comment on before we go.
I have noticed in the videos from your course so far, which I just found out about a couple of weeks ago, so I'm catching up. There's a lot of sort of what are the decks that I am keeping in mind that I want to get when, you know, I have the chance for whatever reason, you know, that I find there are things like I have a wish list like that. That's like, I'm waiting for this to come out and, you know, I'm just spend money on. But then there are also things where it's like, oh, right now in my life, I want to work on this particular thing. So, you know, like I bought a couple of goddess oracles, you know, and right now bought a couple of sort of archetypes oracles, you know, because those were things to focus on. And those kinds of purchases, when it's like, I am working on this thing this week, I'm going to order the deck now, you know, and it'll be interesting to me as time goes on. I mean, I sort of I have been into tarot for, God, since sometime in the 80s, you know.
Okay.
And so there are decks that I have from then. There are decks from my mother-in-law that's like kind of a big collection. And then, you know, since October, I got into the whole like Instagram and YouTube and what people are creating now, and spent a lot of money.
Yes, it is. It is a lot of money. And I do sometimes, like if I have like there's certain decks I only use for a certain thing. For example, my writing process, I use the Sovereign Oracle. I even use it with planning out my year for creative endeavors. I will get a deck specific with a specific purpose. So there's nothing wrong with that. But you're right, it can be an expensive endeavor when you first like, you know, come to the new world of social media and collecting decks. The Instagram posts are so gorgeous. You want to support every every creator's art piece, right? You flip throughs make you what it feels like in your hands too. But then nice to just take a step back and say, okay, do I really need this? Is this deck serving a specific purpose or not? Or am I just caught up in the glitz of this new splashy, campaign, if you will? So that's when I was like, I want to create, and this was born out of my death year. I wanted to create something where people will be able to come back to videos and watch them, you know, in my course and just be like, let me just kind of see how I'm feeling about all of this and be more mindful about their purchases. Just to help.
Mhm.
Just to help.
Yeah. Actually, can I add something on this subject?
Yes.
It's just that for myself, that's where I come into, I'm just realizing into my fantasy self, in the sense that, I see somebody talking about shadow work and they're talking about all their decks, and I'm like, oh yeah, I want to get into that. And then I buy the decks and then I do nothing.
Yes.
So I mean, it's like I eventually have to make a list and say, well, I want to look at this and this and this, and not buy any decks until I get into it.
Yes. And
So-
that's, it's also a little bit of delayed gratification, but oh my gosh, you hit an important point. I do that all the time. Like, oh, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get those decks. I see that they're working with them, and when I have time in the future, or when I'm ready to study it, and the next thing months, and in my case, years go by, and did I really
Yeah, because it's like,
see them? No.
because it's like craft project, it's like craft projects. You see your projects, you go out and buy the supplies until you have the time, but then it's like by the time you get around to it, it could be like 6 months from now.
Yep. And it's like, unless I'm ready now. That's what I have to tell myself. Am I really ready? Am I just sitting idly ready to learn a whole new system? Probably not. But maybe it will happen sometime in the future. Who knows? I don't know. That's a
I
great
feel like you
point.
talk about this a lot sort of in your videos, over time, but this like tarot lies and collecting lies at this interesting intersection between like art and hobby and spirituality. And I think that's like a thing you put your finger on a lot today. Like, am I getting all these decks because I want to have this art collection? Basically, I mean, like people have like all sorts of crazy hobbies and spend all sorts of crazy money on it, and like that's fine, right? But like am I using this as an excuse to not develop my skills? Like are there things that I can't do with just one deck because I never tried to develop that skill? Or I'm trying to like fill this hole by like, oh well, I don't really know how to read on X subject, so I'll just buy another deck and that'll make me better at it. Like, I like the idea of the mission statement, right? Am I more into like the materialistic art side of it, more into the spiritual side? How is that coming together?
Yes. Yes. Dang. See, I just love opening this up to the group, because then you have something, you share something like this, and I'm like, yes, that's exactly what I was trying to get across, but you said it so beautifully. That intersection. And it's just, again, with mission statements, for tracking purchases, for any of that, it's really about that awareness piece. But like you said, it kind of holds you accountable when you have a mission statement like, oh, right now, I'm more into the artwork of it all. I'm not really a reader. I don't read for other people. So, everybody's mission statement will be different. Now, I've been told, like, at least the business side of things with mission statements, that it shouldn't be something that can just change and be fluid all the time. I mean, you might change some in the future. But what is the thrust? What pushes you to collect, and how can you stay within integrity of that in the mission statement? So yeah, thank you. Thank you for picking up on that on the videos, because that's, like you said, it's a weird intersection, because we're using what is also known as spiritual divinatory tools, but we're hobbyists and we collect. And I have friends who spend a gang of money on all sorts of stuff that I'd be like, mm-mm. And I know they look at my card collecting habits, they're like, what? It just was leaked thanks to my husband, that he would casually mention to people I met out here, oh yeah, she's got like 300 decks. And they're like, what? I'm like, first of all, don't you go saying anywhere about that. I'm not ready to deal with these people. So.
I love that in another video about shopping your own collection. So like you had talked about Marseille decks, and I was like, wow, I don't have any Marseille decks. Is that something to look into? And that was the one where it was like, actually, I think I'm going to buy the book and then work on applying that to a PIP deck that's a collection, and see how I relate to that.
Mhm.
And if I feel like switching, maybe I'll get into that, but I don't want to be like, oh, I'm going to buy one Marche deck and then I'm going to buy 6, you know. You know,
Love it.
probably
Yes.
not.
That's so perfect. That's it. Yeah. Shop and see if there's something already in your collection that you can use. The book. That's what I end up doing ultimately with Lenormand decks. I end up, yeah, I have a few. You all will see that in some videos I recorded. But it's like, I think six of them. I could have stopped after 2. But I ended up buying a Lenormand book, like to study, and I realized that was what I was really after in that moment. I wasn't necessarily wanting to go down this collecting path of like, oh, let me get all the Lenormands out there, like I did with the tarot and oracle, especially. So it gave me just what I was looking for in learning a system, right? And actually, I realized, oh, this book fulfilled more what I needed than me buying 25, 30 Lenormand decks, you know? So great point. Great point on that, I have to say. But yeah, shop your collection. Even to this day, I still don't have any Marseille in like in my collection, but I'm like, I don't know, I'm just not feeling it. So like I don't know. And I'm glad I didn't. There have been times in the middle of the night last year and the year before, I'm like, well, I don't have any in my collection. It would make my collection complete if I just go ahead and get one. But I was like, no, gonna be strong. And I'm glad I am, because they wouldn't be used, I can assure you. Like, yeah, so yes. Let me see, I'm looking at the comments before we wrap up. I just bought our tarot, and the guidebook is like the size of a full paperback novel. Nice. I love that too. I brought actually quite a few guidebooks with me on the plane to the DR. With it, and I was just reading them. I couldn't have all my decks, but I have their little, their guidebooks that were like paperback, not too heavy. And again, that kind of quenched a certain thirst that I had for just having a whole bunch of decks when I couldn't have them all, because they're just, especially indie decks, are super heavy, I found, with their box, with their book. Yeah. All right. Any other comments, questions? These have been great. You guys have been awesome. Thank you so much. I so appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for putting your course together. I'm really curious to see where you go next.
I know. I have some stuff in the works, so don't you worry. I'm like, it's finally, like with this one, I had to get this one out. It's like, I wanted to get this out right away, because I was like, I see people asking these kind of questions. And so now I'm like taking my time with the next course I'm working on. But I'm working on some new stuff for the Academy. So stay tuned. There's more. There's a lot more.
Okay, this was great. Thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you all. Thanks again for joining me and your amazing comments. And I will see you all around. We'll keep chatting.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Bye.